Thought About It Podcast, Episode 1, and really a day to where this episode is quite appropriate, though not the subject of this podcast. One of the worst days I've had in quite a long time, and that's saying a lot. I haven't had the best of runs lately other than the Point 5 podcast and a fantastic job in a new city. But lately, it has been a little bit tough. Brand new city, you can imagine, and I've just had a lot of trouble with just getting things going in certain areas. I can't really talk about it like you can understand, but just to say things have been tough in other areas. But anyways, brand new podcast project. Some of you might already know me from the Point 5 podcast, and I've really been enjoying that podcast project. You might be wondering, why am I starting another project? And the obvious answer might be that, this is one where I can talk, because the Point 5 podcast is really for other people to get highlighted and share their views and share their experience and etc. Whatever people bring on the podcast, that's what it's there for. Now, the real big reason why I started this podcast is because I feel like I stopped getting into reading that I was doing before. The big reason for the Point 5 podcast was to get exposed to brand new ideas. I felt like the reading that I was doing really lacked the uh, freshness that I wanted. One of the problems is that, like, with brand new with algorithms, sorry, not brand new algorithms, is that we get served up some of the same content. And this is true with different websites. It depends on, like, the community, whatever the reason. I feel like I tend to see the same view. And even when we're talking in public, you kind of start to see the same thing. You really have to venture into professionals and people who know their stuff, have specific angles, and have prepared to deliver that point in a conversation style. That's really filtering down to a certain amount of people in the world. And there are a lot, don't get me wrong. But that is not an everyday thing, and that is not an everyday experience that you're going to get by just reading content online. I definitely was running in to the same, oh, AI is going to end all of our jobs type content. So that's a great example of something that we just keep on seeing over and over again. But that is not the only issue that needs to be discussed. And that's not the only issue that I want to think about all day. Obviously, I see more than that, but it's honestly quite tough to get writing that's not considering that at all. And Point 5 podcast, I don't know if I've spoken about AI once. I think my episode with Joe Rocky was the only one that mentioned AI, and it was so brief. And it just goes to show that that is such a small perspective. And my point here is that that podcast is for exposing me to new views and getting new takes on things to make sure that I'm not getting stuck in conversation algorithms, which is really a concern. And I feel like it made me a little stale. I don't know how to also say it, stale, dull, or whatever. Like, I didn't have a sharp perspective to take to market, which is a very formal way of saying that. But if you were to think about posting online, that can really have an impact on you. Now, the reading that I was doing before, that kind of dropped off. I actually stopped doing that reading because I've been spending so much time on Point 5 podcasts. That is not something I planned on. Just taking a sip of coffee here every once in a while. But that's not something that I planned on. And that's not something that was a desirable outcome. It's really rolling with things as they're growing and learning, which is, as I mentioned earlier, and you could understand, a very appropriate theme for today and a very fitting topic into this discussion. But anyways, not to get sidetracked and even lose myself here. This podcast is so that I can listen to the content that I was listening to before, and really reading. Reading was the big one. I was an avid reader on websites like medium.com, also Substack. I started getting into that a little bit. And I've also spent quite a lot of time reading posts on social media, joining communities. Usually the community aspect is through websites like Reddit, but mentioning all these websites right away, you can start to notice patterns in what that user behavior is like, and that you have to jump all over the place. Now, something I want to do with this podcast is to take writing from no matter where. Usually it's not going to be single posts that are being made because there can be long discussion, and that's why I'm not limiting it. But it's usually the articles that I'm reading that provide more for me to discuss or bring out more of me to either address something that's being said or just talk about it in general. This doesn't have to be complicated. Now, that doesn't mean that a big point of this podcast is not going to be to summarize works in their entirety. That is not the goal of this podcast. It could be something that I do if I think that it's very relevant. I might go right through it and talk through it the whole way with the most important points. That could even be a large number of episodes that just turns out to be the best thing to do for conversation, that it's just necessary to talk about. Like, if that's necessary for talking about content, then so be it. Now, why am I talking about articles? Well, when I read an article, I right away go towards writing about that article. When I write about that article, I have a great example about today that is relevant to why I started this podcast, which is the talking aspect. I spent all day working, and then after 10 minutes of talking, I realized that all of that work didn't make sense by something that I said out of my own mouth, explaining something into the microphone. I never want to experience that again. I know I will experience that again. I know that almost every listener listening to this is saying, yeah, that's the problem of not talking to people. What the problem is that I don't have access to those conversations. I do have access to them. Obviously, I have professionals joining me on POINT5 Podcast, and I could talk about it, and that's actually a good idea. But I want to be able to dive into the topic myself, outside of very few limited questions to open up the space to others. So now that I mention that, this could be a good supplement to a discussion that starts there. I could use these episodes to be able to open up bigger questions to professionals that I have on. That actually sounds quite interesting. Whole point of this, though, is to start talking about the things that I'm reading. Now, when I write about an article, I find that I'm able to basically make it better. I think everybody could do that. I just have the time to do it. But it's something that I need to understand the article, and that is something that I think differs me from a lot of people. My reading skills are quite good, but I wouldn't say I'm systematic in my reading. I just am really good at writing to where like writing just makes sense for me. Like what I mean by that is that I'm very good at finding the right content to consume in terms of uh, a little bit of a multi-step reading list process that I've got going on websites and just in general. But that should tell you right there if you know how to use reading lists and you maintain them. You've got your process for making sure that you're consuming the right stuff. And this is really going to be talking about the content that hits certain reading lists that have made, my selection. Now, why I want to do this is because obviously I need to motivate myself or have a reason, basically a reminder to read. That's for myself. Obviously, I'm setting goals for myself and setting up projects for myself that help me. That's the most important thing because I know I could be of value anywhere that I find useful. I think that I read an article today actually that was talking about um, following your hobbies, and somebody was talking about starting a YouTube channel, and one of their hobbies were gaming, and that YouTube channel was a flop. It didn't work out. And they were talking about how actually this is where my view kind of differed from theirs. They took it down a different route, but I saw that point as being, everything for a couple reasons, a couple things of what they said. It reminded me that everything turns into work. When it comes to hobbies, like if you're turning a hobby into work, or if you're turning a hobby into a career, that's what they were trying to address. They were saying that their YouTube was a potential career, and they didn't enjoy the fact that they had to perform for somebody. And right when I read that, I said, that's because you didn't say that you enjoy performing for people. You didn't enjoy creating content for people. You don't enjoy creating the dialogue. You don't enjoy talking to people. Um, that's not what you said you enjoy. You said you enjoy gaming, which is very different to the content creation process, just based on what they were saying in their article. I have no idea about that area, but that article is a perfect example of that. Is a perfect example of um, why I do this podcast. I really, really enjoy the podcast creation process. That process allows me to uh, do what I need to do in a very constructive and healthy way, which is obviously a great thing. If you're not motivated, then and you find something like podcasting that allows you to get what you need to do done, then you should definitely not take that as something that you should just push off, and it should just be a necessity. And that's what the Point 5 podcast was, and that's what this is now. Because I found another problem that needs to balance out the other project that I added on. These two projects together will serve as my content consumption and making sure that I'm keeping sharp as an individual. In turn, you get great conversation with great professionals that come on the show. Over 21 guests booked on the Point 5 podcast right now, with 5 episodes already released. This is the first episode of this podcast where it's going to be my view, no guests, and I'm going to be diving into reading that's being done. Now, every piece of reading has flaws if you look for them. That's not what I'm going to be looking for. That just simply won't hit my reading list. What I'm looking for is points that are being made that I read and warrants me to highlight that piece of text and write. Now, this is something that I've already done. I already, I've done this for multiple months on a specific platform called medium.com, where I was reading through people's blog articles or people's stories, they call it on there, and leaving my highlighted perspectives, which is essentially a highlighted section others can see, and then leaving my comment on that section. Some of those sections have reached a relatively high number of people in terms of engagement relative to what I've seen on that platform. And I only had wished that that would have been views that were on a podcast, because I know that in the spoken word that I have a better chance of being able to provide something better. On the medium.com highlights, I'm only able to provide a short perspective on a single take on a single point in somebody's writing. That point that I made was on a tech heavy article that talked about AI, I believe, but it really made a point in the tech space. That's what I could say off the top of my mind, because I actually don't remember the title and all that to the point where it would add to this. But my point that I wrote was that not everything has to become a sci-fi future, and that's something that I think that is being pitched a lot by tech founders and people who are very much in the space of developing technology. Just recently, and just to show how there's discussion behind this, uh, behind writing in general, but even these highlights, is just recently Elon Musk has also made comments on this, either that have resurfaced or that I just saw on X, that something along the lines of making good technology is da 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 da, which really was a quote that was focused on just the technological aspect and seemed to leave out the whole fantasy behind what the world could be in the future. And it sounded like a quote that, in my view, when I read it, was very much focusing on let's only focus on the technology. Now, the post that I made on this, as I said, received tons of engagement. And my whole point with this is that if I can do that with a single piece of writing, with a single line that was written, what could I have said about that article if I had talked about it? And how relevant would that be to somebody who's walking into the office this morning, to somebody who's walking on the treadmill at home, somebody who's meeting a friend later today, or somebody who knows how else people use podcasts, but just to give yourself a new perspective even. It would have been valuable for me to have done that. Let me just take a sip of coffee here. But that's what this provides. I consume articles like there's no tomorrow. As I said, I am an avid reader. I just stopped doing it because I kind of forgot about it. It's not I've been doing it. I just haven't really been, monitoring articles and reading longer form writing. I got stuck into the X posting again, now that I've been focusing on this other podcast. I don't know what else to say on that. And these posts are short burst posts, you know what it is on X. It seems hard to get out of that loop. So this is to get out of that. I don't want to be making short burst posts on X to try to get my opinion out there. I think the longer form and dealing with that space has always been more enjoyable to me in terms of writing, and I've definitely gained the perspectives that I bring on platforms like X from that reading. I took a longer sip of coffee there because the last one was not enough. And so so I'm kind of blabbing on, repeating here, but I'm just introducing the episode. And I also don't want this to be, I mean, on the topic of blabbing on, I don't want this to be something that has to be too structured. I actually enjoy stuff just in the background. I like longer form content. I don't listen to podcasts for things that get straight to the point. I kind of enjoy when they do that naturally and they want to. Sometimes I take away some fantastic things that come out from random talking. And it's easier for me as a podcaster. This is something that I haven't talked about, that the amount of work that goes behind .5 Podcast. I've talked about the differences between this show and that show in terms of letting other people speak. The research for reading an article and talking about it is not even comparable. Like, I'm able to read an article in my normal day to day. It's not like I'm adding that. I did mention that I stopped doing that. This is usually time that is already there, though. I usually have this website, Mercedes Sites, open on my left monitor so that I can consume. So that's not a problem. The highlighting process is something that I actually already do. Um, and writing about it is something that is way more enjoyable to me. And yeah, it's essentially understanding a blog article. That doesn't take me very long, and it doesn't take me long to find something to say about something that's relevant. And the good thing about algorithms is that it kind of does the work for me. I always like sharing the back end process of things with people, and this is obviously a way better place to do that than on a podcast where I'm giving somebody else time to talk. But what a great tool algorithms are for content creators who want to talk about something that's relevant or that's being seen a lot. Now, I don't know if I'm the right person to discuss if that's a good thing for a consumer to use to find the right things to read, but I could tell you that that definitely helps me know that I'm talking about something that's relevant. You know, if a piece of writing that I'm talking about is on the top page of media, sorry, I've got like half hiccups, I call them, for the first time. Pardon me. If a piece of content is on the front page of medium.com, I'm guessing that is relevant either directly or indirectly. There's a group of people that are reading that and finding that valuable. There's a group of people that deals with that group or wants to understand that group. So I'm not going to dig into the specifics of how, you know, anybody can find that relevant, but you know, that's important content. You know, I also want to talk about content that I've learned to find that isn't the top content, but I know it's important, and it's because it makes a sharp point. Uh, content that doesn't float to the top. That's stuff that is waiting to be tested and understood until more people view it as valuable. It takes a little bit of digging, it takes a little bit of reading, and there's a lot of mistakes in there that would bother a lot of people. Either the content's written in a way that's not easy to enjoy, easy to understand in some sections. Um, but really, if you're a good enough writer, you can understand how to read most things. But you also understand that probably wouldn't be the best thing for everybody to consume if you were to decide what to put on the front page. That being said, those perspectives highly valuable. Doesn't mean they're always consistently valuable, but you find some pretty fantastic content in there. So maybe some of what I'll be talking about on this podcast is going to have to do with pieces that are written or said or recorded, because all mediums are open for discussion. Um, Not talking about the medium.com website, but mediums in terms of audio, visual, written, no matter what. Even if there's a movie that comes out that is talking about a certain thing, discussion happens everywhere, and that's what this podcast is for. It's not to criticize, it's not to fact check, it's not to, the list goes on of technical details that I'm not bothered with because that's just work, and there's no shortage of that out there, and there's no shortage of me doing that either. This is a place for me to explore, understand, and think about what's being read by me. And typically I'm reading stuff that is considered amongst the most important stuff out there. I mean, there's no other way to put that. I'm not avoiding algorithms. So I'm looking for, and algorithms aren't perfect with that, but I'm usually in the productivity section, and that ties well into the categories of this podcast. It's self improvement, for the reason that over personal journals, because almost everything that I consume when I talk about it is almost always related to either my or somebody else's self improvement. Even Point 5 Podcast is a show that is exclusively trying to help people get better at something by the perspectives that they take on as a secondary thing. The main one is to expose them to ideas that they wouldn't click on by enjoying a conversation with somebody else. I found that very helpful on other podcasts I've listened to, and I've learned a lot. So I wanted to offer that. But here, this is personal development. Almost everything is going to be to help people. That's really the best way to use my voice when it's not paired with another guest. And yeah, so that's what I'm going to be doing. There's not a whole lot to this introduction video. And I did post a introduction for this channel. Not this channel, this podcast. I confuse my words. Earlier, and yeah, the audio was terrible because I'm using a different recording process and application before, um, because this is a different type of podcast, and it uses different software because I'm not working with a guest. So that had a ton of audio issues. So I'm gonna change out these files and upload this one. But I hope this is nice and simple and gets you excited for upcoming conversation. Obviously, me conversing to you guys, and I would love to hear from you all. I'll be setting up more channels and things like that so that I can engage with people and obviously build up a following and provide you guys notifications anywhere that you want them. That hasn't been done yet, and that's a really good example of this podcast. It's less worried about the professional image that I want to provide on Point 5 Podcasts at all times. Obviously, that's not really labeled as a professional image, but really, there's a certain standard when dealing with other people. This is my area. This is for me. So I kind of have a lower standard. And it's really about getting content out there more than content. It's me getting out my views so I feel heard. And feeling heard is important. I mean, even more important than that, other people being able to listen to something where they're like, "Hey, I see things that way. I resonate with that." That'd be really important for me to know. So, or to I think I recorded this episode a little too long because now my brain's getting a little foggy. But anyways, a good example of how this podcast is completely raw and not I wouldn't even say scripted. Point 5 Podcast is not scripted. It There's just a lot of research that I do on the guest to where I could probably never run out of conversation with them. Here, especially on an introduction episode for a podcast that is not like written extensively beforehand, like, yeah, don't expect to experience this again, because it might be relaxed, but I'll be talking about articles and learning how to make that more engaging for everybody. And just had a rough day, so obviously just happy that I'm sitting here recording something that's working, something that I can post for people, because I really appreciate my listeners. I know that I have a good amount of them. Even there's like 5 consistent ones across certain platforms on the other podcasts. That's huge to me. There's I've reached thousands on different channels and different things like that through different mediums. But I see those viewers show up, and that really means a lot. Especially on a day like this. Today's tough. So, good reminder to self that I was able to start this on one of the tougher days that I've had in quite a long time. Basically, everything felt like it was against me. And look at what I produced. I got a brand new show going after another show that didn't work out. So leave that there. I hope everybody has a great rest of whatever they're doing. And hopefully you catch this podcast when there's tons of more content. I always enjoy binging content when I find it, so look forward to you enjoying it. Having something to listen to that's easy to listen to and also valuable. Have a great rest of what you're doing. Will I end it here? This is almost entertaining now. But I will end it here because I'm going to get this posted and end it here. I don't know what just happened, but this is a really funny end to this introduction episode that didn't seem to provide much other than an introduction for something that's relatively unscripted. Oh my goodness. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Bye bye.